Kia ora everybody, welcome back to Theology. Today we are drinking tea and talking theology as we normally do, and we're drinking English breakfast tea because we're continuing our series talking about some of the basics of theology and like what different disciplines there are and that sort of thing. So today we're kind of doing a 2-in-1 video by talking about political theology and public theology. Now the reason for doing this is public theology kind of comes out of political theology, and they've got fairly similar roots because of that, and they're really closely related. However, there are differences between them, so we will talk about that. The other thing with both of them is they're kind of newer to the field of theology, as in you could argue that they've been done, or parts of them have been done for the past 2,000 years. It's or longer if you're going into Judaism. You can argue that it's been done, but as a specific thing that we're acknowledging is different, it hasn't been done. Let's start with political theology. Political theology is focused on how faith and politics are connected, and particularly how our faith should interplay with politics, or our faith should respond to politics. Then it also has a whole other aspect where it's looking for inerrancies and political ideologies that are trying to claim that they're non-Christian when actually they are developed from Christian roots. And the idea of faith and politics can often make people feel kind of uncomfortable because we've got this idea of the church and state as should be separate, and often like when politics and faith get involved together, it's kind of awkward and uncomfortable. But that's a part of what political theology is about, is going, where should faith and politics, where should we draw a line and go, they're different things, and where should we go, there is actually a relationship here that we need to acknowledge, because otherwise it's just going to be so much worse if we don't talk about things and where they actually come from, because then we're trying to hide information that isn't helpful to hide. Also part of it is going, how much can you actually separate religion and the secular? And you might be able to on a like big corporate level, but on an individual level, should I have to do that? What about on like two people level? What level does it have to be separate on? So it is actually unpacking that faith and church as separate things is an idea, instead of just leaving it as a default assumption and thing that should. It is a newer area because it is post-enlightenment, so it kind of developed as a response to part of what was being said in the Enlightenment, or even a counter argument in some ways. So for example, out of the Enlightenment came the whole idea of the church and state as should be separate, but this idea wasn't really unpacked a lot in the Enlightenment, wasn't really like dug into. It was just gone like, actually this is the way it should be for like other things that were going on at the time. And so theology then went, well, hold on, how much is it possible to separate to religion, which comes with a worldview? How possible is it to separate that? And then the more you go, the harder it can become to separate, because you're getting all these different ideas, you have ideologies mixed in, it gets very complicated. So how much is it possible to actually separate? And that's kind of where political theology developed from. And a part of the reason that it was able to do that was because it was going against some of the things that the Enlightenment assumed about religion. So the Enlightenment assumed that of course faith and religion, of course state and church should be separate, because faith is completely personal and private, so therefore it should have no bearing on the state. Most places who were involved in the Enlightenment period in history are now democratic, so then if I'm voting as a religious person, should my faith not have any impact on the vote that I cast? But that shapes all of my morality and ethics that I would cast my vote upon based on. So how does that work? That doesn't make any sense. To try and separate out my ideology and worldview that influences my ethics and therefore my politics, I shouldn't have to separate that. That doesn't make any sense. In the same way that you shouldn't ask anybody who has a worldview to separate that. The analysis though that mostly goes on in political theology is all focused on the political element of that. And it can be hard to imagine what political theology could look like. And so one example of act of political theology, something that we would call political theology, is the Barmen Declaration in 1934. Now, the Barmen Declaration was written by some Christians living in Germany in 1934, which was during the rise of Nazi power and the Nazi regime, and was definitely during the Nazi regime in Germany. And they're basically going, hey, we don't like the church influence. We don't like the state influence in the church, and the church doesn't have influence in the state at the moment, so that's not really a conversation. That's because of the way Nazi and fascism worked. That's a whole separate video though. But the state has a lot of influence in the church at the moment that it really shouldn't have if we're going to have state and church separation. Kind of a big part of that argument, and they were arguing against what a lot of Nazi Germany was doing and going, hey, as the church, do we really stand for this politically? We don't have to. What does the church stand for politically then, if it's not standing for what is the assumed morals of the day, which is Nazis, which is awful? That is one area that we would consider an act of political theology, or an example of political theology. And it is political theology because it's directly discussing the relationship between theology and politics and faith and politics. And that is what political theology is really focused on, is going, how does all the other stuff we have in theology go out? So public theology is fairly similar to political theology in a few ways, partially because it developed out of it, but grew into its own thing. And a lot of people now who would have called themselves political theologians would now call themselves public theologians, simply like the labels shift and stuff. But most theologians don't always work in those categories, so specifically. So some of the similarities are they're both quite interdisciplinary focused. So they take a lot of what theology has to say, but they also will listen to economics. They'll listen to other political ideas and ideologies that are out there and go like, okay, what's this saying? Where does this play with the Bible and theology? They'll listen to, not that the other areas don't, but that because it's outward focused, the way it interplays with different disciplines is different. So it will take science in a different way and incorporate and discuss that in a different way, particularly because a lot of science is focused more on contemporary issues, and so we'll talk about those because it talks about contemporary issues. So it has that interdisciplinary perspective, has an outward focus, and they're in response to the Enlightenment, and they both are focused on more modern issues and contemporary issues, because political theology was often responding to contemporary political conversations that were going on. And the big difference is that political theology is really focused on the political, where public theology encompasses pretty much any contemporary issue and its response. So it goes beyond political, but it can include political at times. Especially, it considers politics to be a seat at the table that it is in a discussion with. So public theology is really focused on theology and the public, and how that interplays together, and in public issues, in public space, and that sort of thing. So you talk about a public square, and so that would be the internet. So how does theology have a role on the internet? And where do we have that? And obviously I'm a little bit interested in public theology because I'm on the internet doing theology and that sort of thing, so it's an area of special interest to me and close to my heart. But it's really focused on public issues and what theology can add to the conversation. And it thinks of it like a gift, where each discipline there's an issue, or there is something has come up, and each discipline sits around the table and is offering something to go, hey, this is what I have that could help us solve this issue. And there might be a particular person that takes a lead on solving that issue, like a particular discipline that might need to take a lead at solving that issue sometimes, I don't know. But that doesn't devalue what the other disciplines could add to that. So it's about giving it a gift and not trying to control the narrative, and about listening to what other people are having to say, acknowledging, okay, we're in this conversation that's going on. What are other people saying? How do we engage with them? How do we respect what they're saying? How do we respectfully disagree or agree? What's the conversation that's happening here? What conversational partner do I play? Considering theology and religion sometimes has over-dominated the conversation, how can I listen really well to this conversation? And what can we learn from other disciplines, you know? So an example for this one is climate change. We'd sit at the table and this is like metaphor level of like, if you imagine a bunch of different disciplines sitting at a table, so that being like ecology and physics and chemistry and politics and international relations and economics and theology and philosophy and English literature and, you know, communications, like that sort of thing, all sitting at a table going, we have this issue of climate change. What can we add into this conversation, and how can we have this conversation to try and solve it? And what can we do? What can we pass to people? What can we offer to help us come up with different solutions for why this is an important thing that we should be focusing on, for how we can phrase solving it, for what actually physically could be done. So climate change. An aspect of that would be political, because you need to get a way to get people to do things, and the government could be involved in that. And it doesn't lie with governments, but it also lies with many other entities, and the solution can come from many other disciplines. And so theology could add to that conversation. One of the things it could add is like, hey, we're actually meant to be stewards, so that means not only should we be saving this, but that means from the idea of God's create the world as designed or created, like there is a capability for us to steward the earth better and look after the earth better. So not only is that something we should do, we're definitely capable of it. And how can we then add that idea of us being capable of being better, and capable in terms of not just an individual level, but at entities and corporate levels of being better to the earth, because those things are all made up of people. How do we change that conversation? And so that's kind of how I think of it. It's a conversation at the table, and you're talking with all the other disciplines working together on something. And public theology is focused on what theology can bring to this. Now, often public theology and political theology, I think, can sometimes get a bit of a bad rap because they don't seem as focused on the core ideas or the main principles of theology. But a lot of what they're doing is taking those core ideas and main principles and going, how do we express this out? How do we do this in real life? Why does this matter to people? And let's talk about how it matters. Let's talk about all the different ways that this could matter to people. And let's do that. So it's got a bit of practicality there, but it's really, really focused on like themes and ideas that can come out of those things. And it's incredibly important, I think, because it helps us learn how to navigate our response in the world. And with political theology, Jesus acted in ways that were definitely political. Like, that wasn't the only thing he was doing, but you can't deny the fact that what he said and the way he was perceived by the world did not have any political implications at all. They put a sign up saying King of the Jews over his head. King, and now to an extent, is a political title. Monarchy is a governmental system. It's political. Definitely bigger than political what he did, but it definitely didn't exclude that. So therefore we shouldn't exclude it from our conversations. The Bible is also pretty clear on the fact that we're meant to be revealing God to the world this side of heaven and the new creation. Public theology is going, in what ways can the world can we reveal God to the world in ways where it's actually helpful to them, in ways where it's a part of a conversation, so you're listening to each other. There goes my phone. In many ways, public theology really has a heart for mission and for us to respond to the world through our faith. While both are a bit newer, the ideas have been around for centuries, but the main reason that they're really coming to light at the moment is because we're living in a world that's seeing itself as post-Christian, or not everywhere is as explicitly Christian. We don't have any Christian nation states, like you might in Islam, and places that were predominantly Christian, that's changing. They are important because they help us figure out how to navigate changing times when theology isn't always as respected as it was, and it isn't, yeah, it's just different. So we shouldn't underplay their impact at all, because they're just as valid as any other area of theology. That's my little rant. So I hope you enjoyed. If you have any thoughts or questions about theology, please drop them below. If you want to see more videos like this, like, subscribe, let me know what you think. See you next time. Bye!